Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Kristy Taylor, founder of WORxK Solutions, LLC. I am a career and executive coach who is committed to supporting mission-driven individuals and organizations within the social impact sector. And I'm so excited today to kick off our Diversity Works Round Table Series, where we will be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. We're focused on championing inclusive workplace cultures. And I have with me an exciting round of guests today. And I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, starting with Jennifer, and then we'll kick off the conversation.
Thank you so much. I am really excited about this conversation as well. I'm Jennifer Boudre, and I'm the founder of Queer Allyship.
Sarah?
Hi, I'm also so stoked to be here. I am Dr. Sarah Radican. I am the founder of Happiness is Courage.
Thank you so much. Kirk?
Yeah, Dr. Kirk Adams, talking to you from Seattle. I am the managing director of Innovative Impact LLC.
Thank you so much. And Kyara?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyara Ofuwani, managing attorney of Ofuwani Legal Group.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm so excited to kick this conversation off. As you guys know, that it is LGBTQ Pride Month, but we are kicking off a series of conversations over the next few months to focus on diversity in the workplace, diversity in education, and across the board. So we're going to have a group of diverse panels. We'll be coming to you every month to discuss a variety of topics. And today, again, we're going to focus on DEI in the workplace and championing inclusive workplace environments. And I'm going to start this conversation off with you, Sarah, actually. And I want to learn a little bit more about your story because you have a unique approach to enhancing workplace culture through happiness and engagement. And so my question to you is, how do you integrate data-driven strategies with human-focused methods to create a thriving and inclusive work environment? Now, we know how these goes. If you guys have seen me host these before, we always start off with one person answering the initial question. But when we talk about why it's going to be important for us to champion inclusive work environments today, we have a whole panel of experts. So you guys feel free to chime in and bounce off of each other, okay? So Sarah, let's start the conversation off.
Thanks, Kristy. I think it's really interesting to think about the ways companies throw away billions of dollars of programming on initiatives that just aren't working. If anybody has seen the recent Gallup report, engagement is at an all-time low. And what I've seen in my work and in the work of others is part of that is because we're just not keeping the human component in the conversation. So I really am passionate about blending the data into the initiatives that are human-focused. And it's actually pretty darn easy, right? You have to collect and analyze the data that exists or collect better data. Use your metrics that you've got, like employee engagement scores, retention rates, productivity levels, and so on, to identify the places where positive change can make a difference, and then implement tools that actually work. But I think the underlying principle here is that a piece of diversity that's not often discussed is our lived experiences create a framework through which we interpret and engage with the world. That creates a unique fingerprint in our brains. And so identifying the ways that that's going to work is going to be different for every organization. Happiness and positivity, however, are absolutely human needs. And so I find ways to weave those into literally everything that I do. And the best part of that is you don't have to build a facility to be more grateful as an employer or more grateful as an employee.
I'm so excited to kick off the chat with you because you literally started talking about some of the disparities that don't exist when we talk about employee engagement. So Jennifer, Kyara, and Kurt, what are your response to her initial her initial thoughts on what we're missing in these discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Anyone of you feel free to jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree that sometimes we are just in the routine of doing a basic protocol, guideline, or brochure of what diversity and inclusion is, opposed to actually looking at the experiences of team members or others that are working with our organization. And so one way to maybe combat that is first just simply knowing someone's story. And so someone feeling like you are empathizing with them or that you even care enough to know their background will then foster more happiness, to her point, in the workspace. So I definitely agree that we should be more caring about who is helping our organization, who is propelling us forward, and then they'll put in more work if they believe that you care about them and you want a more equitable environment for them.
Well, I just have a question for the general audience, and then for you guys to chime in. Based on what we're talking about, do you often believe, has been my perspective, which I don't share often, that a lot of times we come up with these DEIA initiatives as a Band-Aid to some of the real issues that are taking place in the workplace, right? And so when we talk about, to Sarah's point, when she just mentioned here about the data shows that even though these initiatives are taking place, that a lot of times that when we talk about actually look at the data for engagement, that we're not getting the outcomes that we're looking for. So Kirk and Jennifer, I would like you kind of to respond to that in terms of, that gap that's there.
Sure. When talking about happiness, I think about thriving. I'm a blind person. I dedicate my professional career to creating career opportunities, pathways for people with disabilities. Only 35% of us are in the workforce compared to 70% of working age general population. So I think about creating conditions to thrive and what the barriers to thriving are around ableism. Disability is the minority group that knows no other demographic boundary. So intersectionality really plays in here. If you are doing an authentic job of including people with disabilities, you're doing an authentic job of inclusion overall. And I think the reasons that DEIA campaigns oftentimes don't work as well as we want is that we're dealing with structural ableism, racism, sexism, ageism. All the isms are built into our structures, and they were put there on purpose. They were built intentionally to privilege certain groups over other groups. So we just really need to understand the structures and how to even that playing field as far as privilege, inclusion, conditions for thriving, customizing fit between persons and their workplace so that they can thrive and bring their best selves to work.
That's a great response.
Yeah.
Jennifer, did you want to have the last word on that?
Well, and I think one of the things that we have sort of touched on a little bit from everyone is it starts with us, right? Yeah. Each one of us are bringing ourselves to the workplace. So being really clear on your own identity and who you are and all of the intrinsic bias that you have, because we all have them, is the only way we can get to a place of being empathetic. Right. I'm a white, cisgender, heterosexual, college educated female. I have no idea what it's like to be other than myself. So I have to be able to step back and really listen and validate other people's experiences so that then I can make change and put in place, whether it's policies or, situation groups, whatever folks need, based on what they need and want, not what I assume.
You know what? I'm so structured in how I do these, but I got to kick this question to you guys, right? And just for any of you to respond, and then I'll kick the official next question to you, Jennifer. But I think you and all of you guys made initial great points. I wanted to go back to something Kirk said about, and you, Jennifer, about like one, these biases and systematic things that exist, right? And that we all have some level of prejudice, unconscious bias. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that we don't know what we just don't know. I remember teaching a class on cultural competency for healthcare professionals, and the feedback for that class before I got there would always be, so negative. But I think we have to be able to foster conversations in a way, because once I started teaching the conversations, because one of the things I would say to students is, if I am a Black person, which I am, who grew up in a certain neighborhood or certain group, I am just only know what I know. And that literally applies the same if I am a white person growing up in the Midwest, right? And I wasn't exposed to, we don't know what we don't know. We just see what we see on TV, and that allows us to make assumptions about each other. So I wanted to give you guys a chance, the opportunity to respond to this. I made a Facebook post this morning before we started this event, talking about at some point, while I'm pretty apolitical, and any of the events that I throw, they're not going to be politically driven. At some point, as a leader, we have to make a transition and decide to make a stand about where we're going to be and what we're going to do and what we're going to advocate for, right? And we have to be able to make sure that we're not acknowledging the reality that these things exist. Having intrinsic bias, unconscious bias, right? Unconscious bias does not automatically mean you're racist. And I think that we just take stuff and run with it. And that's why it's important to educate people. So I want to give you guys an opportunity to respond to what I just said, because it's really based on the comments that Sarah opened the door for, and each of you responded, right, in terms of where we really are as a society and this unconscious bias and just this deeply rooted thing that if that even exists.
Oh, it exists for all of us. I think one of the things that's also really important when it comes, especially, it's Pride Month, and, I'm here representing, the queer perspective, is that, again, people are bringing their whole selves to work, right? And when we look at the impact of legislation and what is happening politically, and I'm not going to go political, but we cannot forget that people are bringing that with them to work, their responses. When you talk about young folks, the Trevor Project's survey on mental health showed a dramatic impact on the mental health of youth because of what they're hearing and what is going on in the political arena. So if we want folks to be happy at work and in life, we need to understand that everything is impacting.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. I think that we as a whole deal with this inferiority complex, in which spans all the way back from slavery to civil rights to all of that, in which we have not reprogrammed our minds to see that everyone is on the same playing field. And that's shown in statistics from the neighborhoods that Black and brown people live in, from the wealth gap that's dealing in our communities. And so, to the point of unconscious bias, really what it is that we have to unprogram ourselves. If we're continuing to just watch TV programming that's showing Black and brown people in an inferiority complex place, or showing them as lack or not wealthy or poor or ghetto or things like that, then other cultures are always going to treat people based upon what they're seeing on TV or the music that they're listening to. And so really, until we address that we're continuing the programming by what we're watching on TV or what we're listening to or what we're doing on an everyday basis, and then reverse that into really showing how people act on an everyday basis. Because what we're seeing on social media and what we're seeing on TV is not how every culture acts on a regular basis. It's just a select few, or what they're just putting out there for commentary. And so really it has to be addressed that this is not how a particular group acts, or that a particular group isn't supposed to get some type of benefit over another, or is over another based upon past experiences, if that makes sense. So I 100% agree with you that we have to just speak it on the head of what the unconscious bias is, and then we're able to break it down from there.
Exactly. Sarah and Kurt, did you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, just quickly, just thinking about the ADA. Next month will be the 34th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
So 35 years ago, it was completely legal to build a building without a wheelchair ramp, or put in a street without a curb cut. So these civil rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1963, really kicked all this stuff off, and that's not very long ago. So we weren't talking about unconscious bias when I was in undergraduate school. We are now. So I think that's great progress. In the late 70s, disabled students at Berkeley, Ed Roberts in particular, who's a quadriplegic, they had to live in a hospital. They were not integrated into their campus life, and they protested that, and they created the independent living movement, and they modeled legislation they sought after the civil rights legislations of the 60s. So there's a lot of people engaging now and starting to understand what our rights are as human beings and what we're entitled to, and starting to fight for it and build upon what's happened in the past. And I'm just sitting here thinking about all that while all of you brilliant people are talking.
Sarah, did you want to respond to that? Thank you so much, too.
Yeah, I think just building on what everybody has already said, a challenge inherent in all of that work is it's not a light switch. It is a journey to get to a place where we are in a better conversational societal narrative. And there's so much fear that people carry with them when thinking about engaging in that conversation. I think if we can destigmatize curiosity, and if we can destigmatize trying to engage, even if it's messy, we'll get to a better place. Otherwise, people just lock up and choose not to engage because it's too psychologically or sometimes literally dangerous for us to do that. And that doesn't get us to a better place. So I hope that conversations like this can lead us to places where curiosity blossoms and there's less judgment and more just questioning to get us to a more informed and ethical and moral space to work from.
I 100% agree. I made an announcement last night about my forthcoming book, that rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques, that cognitive model, it really does that deep-rooted thought to get people to address. And one of the other things, because Jennifer, I'm going to shoot the next question to you that I'm looking at in this conversation, I want to respond to a couple of things. Yes, we're not going to get political, but I will say when we're having discussions about DEIA, and I have to admit, right, we're always going to toe that line because we're taking a stance on here's what is right. Right. We're not going to tell people who to vote for and engage in politics in that way. But what we're doing is activism. It is political work in some way, shape, or form because we're doing advocacy. Right. So, I do want that to be known and understood that at some point, as a leader, you have to say, and this is who you guys are. You're leaders in this movement. You have decided to take a stand and advocate and speak up on things that you see that are happening. The other point that I wanted to make to all of you as we move to the next question is that we started this conversation off. Again, we're talking about champion inclusive work environments, but we transitioned to more of a societal type conversation. Why, right? Because we know that before we even get to work, we really have to do, it's going to keep going back to that, right? Because there's so much taking place on the outside that before we can even get inside of the doors of work, that we need to be looking at systemic and systematic change as well. So Jennifer, I'm going to kick the next question over to you. You told us a little bit about yourself, your work with LGBTQ plus advocacy and your personal experiences have shaped your approach to inclusivity. And it comes out a lot in what you've already said. So can you share how your organizations how organizations, when we talk about inclusive work environments, can create safe and supportive environments for LGBTQ plus employees and their families?
Yeah, I think Sarah touched a little bit, we mentioned fear. And I think fear comes from a place of lack of awareness. And with LGBTQ plus rights, there's been a dramatic uptick, right? When we compare the rights and the movement with LGBTQ plus versus the civil rights movement, it's been a much more compressed time period, right? So things have happened a lot faster. There's a lot of new language, a lot of new information, a lot of new awareness, and people are trying to catch up, right? So if they don't understand something, like Sarah was, referring to also, is they're afraid, right? They don't want to say the wrong thing. I will explain my personal experience is my son is 28 years old and is proudly bisexual, and my bonus son is trans. And I've worked in education for a very long time and watched as, when I started, I was a school librarian for many years. And when I started in 2003, there were no books that reflected queer characters. The focus, frankly, was very much on getting characters of color. And that was a very important movement and an important push. When I left my last job as a school librarian in 2023, I couldn't buy a book that didn't have a queer character, right? So the visibility within 20 years was dramatic. And I think people are still trying to catch up, and at the same time dealing with all of the negative political climate toward LGBTQ plus folks. We literally have people fighting for their existence. And so to build an inclusive environment in a workplace is to acknowledge that that is a reality, to acknowledge that queer people are everywhere, and you don't necessarily know, and you don't necessarily need to know, but you need to develop policies, you need to develop hiring practices, you need to understand that having an inclusive work environment is good for business, not just for humanity, right? We've increased retention, increase recruitment. Gen Z that's coming up, they're 36% plus identifying as LGBTQ plus. So if we are wanting to grow workplaces and grow sustainable businesses, you have to be aware of what it is that is going on. And I find myself doing what I call LGBTQ plus 101 over and over and over again. And it is, I forget, because I've been doing this work for so long, that there are so many people who truly don't understand the difference between gender identity, sexual orientation, gender and gender expression, and how we can make sure that a physical space and an emotional space is safe and affirming.
I remember teaching health in 2010. I would teach just like basic health education classes in college. By 2015, my students were having to educate me. I was like, wow, I just knew a few terms, LGBT. And then by 2015, it was like LGBTQIA plus. My students would, I remember going to a training, and then my students would, educate me about some of the different terms. And I'm still not there. And I think that it's important to admit, that, hey, this is a learning process. Kirk talked a little bit about intersectionality and, people who, I am a straight woman, but, I might be Black and queer and have a disability. There's this intersectionality that exists. And when I talk about this in my cultural competency courses, it starts out with where you are in terms of, okay, you're dealing with something as a minority, right? And then when we start adding these elements of intersectionality, it just continues to compound. So let me give you guys an opportunity to respond to Jennifer's response, and then we'll keep the conversation going as well. Sarah, did you have anything?
Yeah, as somebody who identifies as part of the LGBTQ umbrella and is married to somebody who's very much trans and lives in that space in my personal life, it's so interesting to see the intersection and I think one of the other challenges that happens in these spaces, whether it's in personal life or the workplace, is once you get flagged with that kind of an identity, you become the go-to for a lot of people. And that's a huge burden to carry. We talk about tokenism in all aspects of diversity. And it's, I think to Jennifer's point, this landscape, and to your point, Kristy, this landscape is changing so rapidly and continues to change so rapidly that even those of us who live this reality sometimes stumble understanding the current language or the current politics around the conversation. And so it's just really messy. And when you're asked to act as a spokesmodel for an entire a group of humans, that can be an extra layer of stress and anxiety that we carry with us in our lives. So again, I'm always an advocate for speak to what speak to your lived truth, whether that's in the workplace or not, but don't feel like we should never feel like we have to become the mouthpiece for an entire demographic. If you want to, great. If that's your thing, that's awesome, but it's not an obligation. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of what is already a really complicated space.
If I could also just add into that, this is why I think allyship is so vitally important, because as a straight white woman, I can take that burden, right? And I can help to educate, because it's too much for folks in the community. It is too much for any marginalized group to be the spokesperson and the educator all of the time. And so the more that we can help other people have awareness of all of the issues that we're discussing, the stronger we're all going to be.
Perky Kayara?
Oh, I just thought about picking your battles and microaggressions and dignity. So, as a person with a disability, microaggressions are just part of life, as it is for people of color and anyone with a discernible difference in the mainstream. But like I go to the airport with my lovely wife, who's an African American woman, and I will be in TSA, and they will say, "Can I see his ID? Does he have any metal in his body?" And I will say, I'm here, and I have a visual impairment, but not a hearing or speech impairment. So would you please speak directly to me? So do you choose to try to educate that person on the fly? Do you save your psychic energy for something that can be more impactful? So those are questions that advocates need to ask all the time. I think that the allyship point that was just made is so vital, so crucial. My children are biracial, no disabilities. They are disability allies. They will make a point. I've seen both of them do it around accessibility, ableism. So it's a real thing. So I'm so glad allyship was brought up.
Yeah, and I want to definitely respond to something Sarah said earlier, but I want to give Kyra a chance to respond because I think that's going to lead to a whole nother piece of this discussion. Kyra, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. Yes. Having allies is definitely key to the plight of advocacy, especially if we're talking about unconscious bias in other groups, not necessarily knowing the culture of one group or the need of that group. Really, to make a big impact, you do have to build nations and connect nations. And so I definitely agree that having allies is going to be key in the fight that we're fighting for equality.
So when we talk about disability, race, gender, sexuality, Sarah mentioned something that I feel like, Kyra, we all can probably really relate to, but I've experienced this as a Black woman a lot, right? And that's this concept of tokenism. It is really, literally one of the reasons why I said I would never cross over into this space. But I'm a history professor. I have a degree in health science. I have degrees in education. It's like I know statistically all of this stuff, right? And I'm holding myself back from these conversations because it's always like, oh, well, you're a Black woman, you are a veteran, you are this and that, you make the perfect rep. So you come to me. And I love, Sarah, what you said about not feeling like you have to be the representative for an entire group just because, okay, you identify as LGBTQIA, or just because I'm a Black woman, or just because, Kirk, I'm somebody who has a person with a disability, I gotta be, so I want you guys to speak to that piece of maybe your experiences with tokenism. I want you to speak to that piece on your perspective, because again, it could be a big jump. And when we talk about, especially in the workplace, I used to refuse to be on certain boards just because, no, you're not going to choose me because I'm the perfect fit. That is tokenism, And so let me give you a chance to respond to that. And then I'm going to kick the next question to Kirk for our discussion. But definitely want to talk this piece on tokenism in the workplace.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Tokenism is a thing. So with me growing up in the Midwest, I grew up in Wisconsin. And so I definitely grew up with a lot of Caucasian counterparts. And with me being a small percentage of Black or brown individuals in the schools. And so definitely was used to speak about diversity many different times, whether it was doing when I was at my internship, when I was at school, whatever the case is. And I did take the position in the past of sometimes like, oh, like maybe I don't want to speak for everyone. But that kind of has changed.
Yeah.
And why do I say that? Because really we are called to speak to the masses and we have to speak the truth. And if you are called upon to bring a different perspective and make change in that moment, then it like to transition your perspective of it being an honor and a privilege to change someone's mindset, right? Because we don't have as much, sometimes like we're like, oh, we might meet them another time. Hey, it's not our responsibility to change their mindset. But if it's not our responsibility, then who is it going to be? Like, who is going to change their mindset? When are they going to encounter someone else like you that may change the trajectory of their life and then change the trajectory of others? Because if you change their mindset, then they're going to treat others differently or maybe change their actions. And so while tokenism may not be the best thing, or maybe may not be what you particularly want, maybe changing the position that it's an opportunity to make great impact, maybe some way to take that. But yeah, I definitely had tokenism happen many times. I'm always that person that's going to speak truth. I can remember a time that I had an internship where there was a diversity program where they had students come work for a corporate firm, and it was all Black and brown students and things of that nature. So they would feed us every day. And so this particular company felt as though they should buy us Popeye's chicken for lunch one day thinking that they were appealing to a Black crowd. However, in my opinion, that was very racist or stereotypical, and to think that just Black people eat chicken. And mind you, I'm alkaline vegan, so I don't even eat chicken. And so, I had to just explain to them, like, I knew they were going to feel some type of way about me, but I had to communicate to them, like, hey, you guys are contributing to the health disparities in the Black community by giving us fried chicken from somewhere. You're contributing to stereotypes by thinking we want to eat Popeyes. Like, at least get us a gourmet soul food or something. But you guys went to a fast food Popeyes and then thought that that's what these students wanted, right? And so that may cause a conflict, or I may have been like, okay, like this may be a tokenism moment where they're expecting me to teach them, but it was necessary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that really makes sense. And I want to give everybody else a chance to respond too, because I love the way that you change your perspective. This roundtable series is the shift in perspective for me. I remember having a conversation with my uncle, who is a key leader, and we were talking about this, and I was like, hey, I don't sit at these tables for this reason, but I show support, right? And he was like, you need to be there, because it's exactly what you just said, Kayer. And that one conversation changed my perspective. And I was like, I got to get into this space and bring people with me who are really doing this work. And so Jennifer, Sarah, Kirk, let me give you an opportunity to respond to that, because Sarah, you was the one who kicked it off, right?
I want to say just a quick thing again about allyship, which I view my role as an ally is to stand in front and take the arrows and then step aside and to amplify the voice of the people that I am being an ally to. And so again, it's always being very clear that this is not my lived experience. I can educate you, but I'm not here to speak on behalf of anyone other than myself. But I do think it's important for folks, again, within the workplace to find those allies. If you are exhausted by being the person that has to be at the table all the time, find that ally that's going to be willing to help your voice be amplified, to not speak over, but to amplify.
And I want to respond to you, Jennifer, when we talk about allyship. And it was something that Kayer said a little bit earlier in her initial response. When we're speaking, right, and we're speaking about obviously when I speak, I'm speaking about the Black experience, Black woman. But what I always try to say is that we're not a monolith. And I think adding that into the conversation because we know as Black women, and I'm sure it is the same, right? People are looking at you as that monolith because automatically you're becoming that representative. So Sarah, you might say, okay, well, I am not, this is the life I'm just happy to be living, but people will still look at you as that example, right, for a collective. And so let me give you a couple of final words of response, and then Kirk, and then we're going to kick it back to, Kirk will be the last response, and then I'm going to ask Kirk his direct question as well.
Just really quickly, I think part of the reason it's so exhausting is so often the opportunities that are granted in the workplace are additional duties that are considered volunteer activities, are not compensated or not compensated well. I don't think that fast food counts as compensation. And so you're being asked to step into an uncomfortable space to represent an entire group of people, even though you only have a fraction of the experience, and it's like out of the goodness of your heart. So I think from an organizational perspective, it is so crucial that company leaders recognize that when you ask somebody to step into that space, even if you're calling for volunteers, you need to make sure that you are compensating them for their time somehow, some way, in a way that is appropriate. Because just putting a volunteer committee position on your LinkedIn profile doesn't get you anything. So I want to make sure that company leaders don't feel like they're off the hook for really taking advantage of people under the guise of it's a growth opportunity, because it very rarely is.
Listen, my God, let me get Kirk to respond, but I do want to say, Sarah, listen, one of the other biggest problems I've had is when people have created these DEIA positions, right? Grand titles, and then you give people work. You say, oh, well, you're going to be able to Title IX. Like, you're giving them work that's human resource, like just creating these positions just so you can say we're addressing DEIA within the workplace. And so we've appointed a DEI. Oh my God, I'm sure you guys have comments on that. Let me get perspective from Kirk, and then I'm going to shift to the next question.
Okay, tokenism. I did my doctoral work. I did ethnographic research and interviewed blind individuals who self-identified as successfully employed in large corporations. So people that Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Boeing, Chase, AT&T, etc. And they had all self-identified as successful. One of the themes that came out with every person was disappointment. And everyone was disappointed on how much they had to continue to fight for accommodations. Everyone was disappointed that there weren't any other people with disabilities as high on the org chart as they were. Disappointed that junior people, less talented, less experienced, without disabilities were promoted beyond them. Disappointment that there was no one in the C-suite with a disability, no one on the board with a disability. So they all felt some really significant degree of tokenism, that their company would point to them as a success story of disability inclusion, but they were often the only one. So tokenism is definitely real in the disabled employment space as well.
Well, gosh, you guys are saying something that makes me want to take this conversation another 2 hours, because I really want to go back to that, but I know I got to go back to that thing because Sarah keeps bringing up all of these points, right? And and to me, those, when you hire people and you are just giving them titles, and then you give them a work, they give them a job description, and then the actual work that they're doing, they're just there for the title, right? And oh my gosh, I can go down a rabbit hole with that, but I want to quickly introduce Dr. Tim Hill. He had some technical difficulty logging on this morning, but we're going to interweave him into this conversation. Tim, we've done this before. This is an organic conversation, so you know that to just kind of listen for a few minutes and jump in. And I'm going to throw this next question out to Kurt. So, Kurt, your work, we talked a little bit about, we've heard the voices, Black women, white women, LGBTQIA, and all of this diversity stuff. And you are sharing your experiences from the perspective of somebody who is an advocate for people with disabilities. And I love the fact that you brought up intersectionality. And so your work really focuses on accelerating the inclusion of people with disabilities in the workforce. And so when we talk about these inclusive workplaces, what are some key strategies that companies can use to actually implement, but not only hire, but also actually retain and support employees with disabilities?
I would say the easiest, most effective way to start creating a disability culture is to focus on self-disclosure. So if you're an organization of any kind with, say, 15 people or more, you're going to have someone in your organization as a person with a disability. 70% of disabilities are not visible. So you're working with people who have disabilities who could benefit from an accommodation, could benefit from customized support that could allow them to bring more of themselves to work, that could allow them to thrive better in your organization. So when I consult with companies, I always say, let's start baking self-disclosure in, whether it's a performance review time or on people's anniversaries, whatever natural touch points you have with people in your organization, start asking and start giving examples. So-and-so got a bigger monitor because they can do their work better with a larger monitor. So-and-so needs a 2-hour break in the afternoon because of their disability. So once you start having people self-disclose and you start doing the right thing and customizing the fit between that person and the workplace, that starts shifting a culture into that thoughtful space, which all employers should be having. Like, what do the people in this organization need to thrive? And if a person has a disability, that customized fit will look a little different. But I really think self-disclosure. I'll just give one story. I was hired by a arts organization here in Seattle that runs 3 historic theaters. They have about 100 employees, 900 volunteers. They wanted their staff and volunteers on audiences to reflect the community, which would mean 15 to 20% should be people with disabilities. And I was interviewing a leader in their organization, and she said, we have a person with a disability working here. And this was a very severely developmentally disabled gentleman, nonverbal, who had a job coach and work part-time in maintenance. And I said, guarantee you have at least 10 people working in this building with a disability right now. And in a subsequent conversation, talking to another leader, and somehow it came up, she said, well, can you sit on my right side? Because that's the side I can hear from. And we were just chatting. She said, yeah, I have a lot of trouble hearing in staff meetings and retaining the information because it's so noisy and you can't really hear. And I said, well, there are some technologies we can use that will allow you to hear better and feel more comfortable and less stressed. And so she went to HR and requested an FMM system. And a month later, when I went to back visit, she was using it. That was an accommodation. It was visible. She was in leadership. She was able to talk at the next staff meeting about what an accommodation is, how it had helped her, and encourage others to do the same.
I really love the point you talk about self-disclosure. Let me give folks a chance to respond to that and the importance, because I think I purposely added the A because I think so many times we get DEI, right? And we get into those dynamics, but we leave off the game, forget that Kirk said 70% of people have some form of disability. So anyway, let me give you a chance to respond to that. I love this idea of self-disclosure and accommodation.
I just really love that Kirk mentioned the scaffolding of giving people an idea of what they can ask for as an accommodation, regardless of what the situation is that's causing a barrier to them living their best life in their space. Because I think so often people don't know what's on the table as an opportunity. And so it's super helpful to give people just a starting point to build off of, and then to be open to a conversation as opposed to, here are the 3 things we offer. That doesn't really help anybody but the 3 people that it applies to.
Yeah, and it goes to show in that organization that you did that partnership with Kirk, when we were talking about, okay, we have one person, and then you go and talk to other leaders and find out, hey, that individual that there are more disabilities, folks with disabilities exist. It just also highlights the importance of people's voices being heard, right?
Yeah.
The level of comfortability.
And they're building it into their performance review process. So annually, when a manager talks to their employee, they're going to talk about accommodations and say, we have a budget. We want to provide every employee with what they need to be thriving here. And here are some examples. So.
We'll get a couple more responses to that, and then we're going to move on to Kyra, just because of the fact we're going to keep pushing forward to hit our timeline, okay?
I want to think also, kind of linking this back to the conversation around tokenism and keeping in mind that someone's identity or someone's disability or needs is one piece of who that person is, and to ensure that that does not, translate into them becoming the token representative for whatever issue it is that we're discussing, or that they're self-disclosing.
Today the WORxK Solutions is also supporting an organization called Meta Association, and they're throwing a Meta Men Summit. And one of the points that I always have George, we work together often on events like this, is that hearing when we're dealing with even with people with mental health, right? Statistics 1 in 4 people suffer from some form of mental health. So when we talk about all of this stuff taking place in the workplace, to Kirk's point, these conversations are important. I wanted to get a comment from Tim, because I know that you work as if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, education psychologist, right? And we both come out of education. We're working these IEPs for students and supporting them and making sure that we provide accommodations for them. So I want to get your perspective on that, and then I'm going to kick this over to Kyra so that we can ask her a few questions about her experiences as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you. So I just want to clarify, I don't work as a school psychologist. What I do is I'm an education consultant, and I'm also a therapist. But even in working in the schools, the one thing I will tell you is a lot of times we get an IEP plan. And if you don't know what an IEP plan is, it's pretty much the plan for a special education child is really what it is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we get it, but we don't necessarily have the means to implement it and put it into action. And so that leaves the kid actually in a demoralized position, and also leaves the teacher in a demoralized position. But a lot of times, the funny thing is we often claim it as burnout, right? Whether the kid is burned out or the teacher's burned out, but really that's not burned out. Burned out actually has to do with you being intrinsic. versus extrinsic. And so what we're finding is a lot of our kids and a lot of our teachers are demoralized. They don't have the skills, nor do they have the access in order to effectively do their jobs, which is causing that disdain or that distrust in the organization as a whole. But a lot of that has to do with DEIA, and that has to do with AAA. And I ain't talking about the insurance, y'all. I'm talking about awareness. I'm talking about accessibility, and I'm talking about action. Those are the things that in my opinion, is what DEIA stands for. Because if you're not aware and if you don't have action and it's not accessible, then what are we talking about, right? And so having that in totality and moving that forward and making sure that everybody has the same opportunities, and it might not be all the same opportunities. It might just look different, and it might even feel different. But the idea is that we're all able to do our jobs with the same amount of fidelity as the other person.
Thank you so much. And the reason why I think that's so important is because when we talk about, I love what you said there, because when we talk about building inclusive workplaces, to Tim's point, we got to make sure that people have the resources that they need, right? So we open those spaces up, and can be the disillusion of these people are burnt out. They burnt out because they don't have the resources, and that goes back to Sarah's point of paying and properly compensating people. So Kara, who has been an advocate, she's a lawyer, and I have to give a shout out to the fact that you were a beauty queen. You've done all these awesome things, but you've done a lot of extensive work in nonprofit law and community activism, and I think that it shows in some of your answers and highlights your dedication to social justice. And we here at Work Solutions, we do focus on social impact work from a coaching standpoint. So when we talk about creating these inclusive workplaces, how can organizations integrate principles of health, food, and environmental justice within their DEI strategy to benefit both the employees and the broader community?
That's a great question. I would say that the addressing of the wealth gap is going to be one of the first things that we have to address when it comes to health, food, and environmental justice. A lot of our communities are plagued with food deserts. So if you go into a lot of the urban communities, which encompass a lot of Black and brown individuals, there's probably just some gas stations, fast food restaurants, and things like that, if that, on the corners. There's no access to actual grocery stores, farmers markets, and things of that nature. And so when you're talking about these individuals even getting to a place of work, you have to first start with survival. If people, Black and brown people, don't even have access to finances to upkeep their survival of housing and food in their, or even fresh air or where they live, they're not even thinking about going to work. So I think we first have to, before we even talking about the environmental and health food piece in work, we have to establish that first in the neighborhoods. And then once we establish that, then those folks would be able to then work or have their business or things like that. But when we're talking about actually being inside of the workplace, I think at Simple, we could just start providing more finances. Honestly, it's a financial thing. It's a wealth gap thing. I'm not even going to lie to you. If we're talking about how when we're looking in Black neighborhoods, there's smog in the air, or they can't even get fresh fruit, like, I'm just still sticking at home because I can't even get to the work piece, because I'm still thinking about how they're not even at work because they're not eating or breathing correctly. So I think that first we have to address that. We have to address that we need to get more clean environments. We need to get more access to healthy food and things of that nature, and then go to work and then be able to go to work. But once we are at work, we have to address more inclusivity of what the new cultures are. And so that's also why I wore my traditional fit. So I'm not, my husband is Nigerian, and so I do like to wear some of the African traditional fits, but we should be able to, when we're talking about environment, wear things like that express our culture when we're at work, and that will contribute to a healthier environment or things of that nature. Or even being able to talk about the cultural foods that we eat or things of that nature. And so we have to address what I said in the first comment of addressing that we were stripped of our culture, address we were stripped of our language, address we were stripped of our food. And once we really have that conversation, then the environment and the workplace will be more healthy, and we'll be able to foster what inclusivity actually looks like from the perspective of someone else's culture opposed to assimilating to a particular culture. Does that make sense? Because I know I said a lot.
No, you said what it is. I mean, you said exactly what it is. All of these, I think that this is going to happen every time we have a conversation about this, right? we cannot just say, okay, we're talking about BIPOC. We're talking about systems in education, because we're each one of these roundtables is designed to address some topic. We have to talk about the underlying issues. We have to talk about the social determinants of health, which is all those things you just mentioned that are the root. So let me get a response from each of you to Kyra's question. She's going to be the last question that we pose, and then Tim, we're glad that you were able to jump on. So we definitely want to hear from you in that response. I'm going to jump to you first, then we're going to go around and give everybody a chance. For what you said was spot on. You cannot, otherwise these will continue to be superficial discussions. When we talk about children in the LGBTQIA community, who don't have safe spaces to come out as queer, who don't, who have parents who don't understand. When we're talking about the continuous discussion on DEI, but forgetting to add the A, right? To support, making sure that we provide accommodations for people with disabilities, and acknowledging that this is not going to change. We can sit here and talk all day. Nothing's going to change until we actually address the root cause. And so that's your point was spot on. So Tim, let me give you a chance to respond to that, and then we're going to get some other responses as well.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The one thing that a lot about mental health and as far as our own struggles, it does start at home. We look around and we see what we have or what we don't have, and then we gauge our lifestyle from there, right? Sometimes you have to rob Peter to pay Paul. Sometimes that you do certain things in order to make sure that a bill is paid, and that not only affects your own mental health at home, but let's go a step further, right? Like, what does that look like on your job? And then what kind of job are you holding, and what kind of stress does that enact? So if you're in a high stress job with a high stress home, where do you get your retrieval at, right? And that's what's happening to a lot of people, because it used to be where we work in 2 or 3 jobs, and now we're doing businesses. And so you see that stress on people, and it's weighing them down. And even you don't have that diversity and inclusion, if you don't feel welcome on the job place, and you don't have those skills to have that dialogue, then what do you do, and how does that job ever get done, or how does it even look like the function looks like for any of us, right? And so that's one thing that I always try to tell people when I see them in person. Remember where you're at, where you're trying to go, and what are the barriers that is preventing you from getting there, and what are your workarounds. And when you can do that, then you can start seeing true change, not only on the job and the function that you're doing, but really it starts in here.
Exactly. Let me get one more response to that, and then we're going to start to wrap up this conversation.
I just want to point out that there's a common narrative that says that money can't buy happiness. And as a happiness researcher, that is a partial truth. To Kyra's point, if you can't pay your bills, if you can't feed yourself and your family, then you are going to be unhappy by default. So that whole concept that money doesn't buy happiness only flies. It's kind of coming from a place of privilege to be able to say that. It's true at a point, but what we're talking about is a lot of people who live in a space where they don't have enough to just get by on the day-to-day. So I think that's an important distinction to make.
And that's why I talk about these types of conversations. Yes, we're not here to go on a full banter march of, politicism, right? But it's always going to be on the verge, because people need to make livable wages. People need to be able to have access to, if I ask for an accommodation at work, I need to be able to have access to that accommodation. Really is law, right? So this has been a great conversation today to kick this off and get us started. I wish that I could go for another hour with you guys. But what I want to do right now is when we talk about cultivating these inclusive work environments, I'm going to go around the room. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to respond, 30, 45 seconds max, right? To respond to give me your final, what can they do? And then also everybody, this is everybody's final plug. So shamelessly, unshamelessly, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Plug your business, 45 seconds, go. Jennifer.
So my business is Queer Allyship, and you can find me at queerallyship.com. I'm on Facebook as at Queer Allyship, and on Instagram as at queer_allyship. And what I want folks to know is that if you have queer people in your workspace, or if you have people in your workspace, you have queer people in your workspace. And it is really, really important for people to gain the awareness and the understanding. And I am here to help. and in a way that is non-judgmental, and provide the space for folks to ask the questions that they may be uncomfortable asking, and get to a point of being very, very strong and affirming allies.
And I really love the fact that Jennifer is an example of, hey, we can be advocates and open the door. We're not necessarily the voice, right? But sometimes people feel like I can't stand up for anything, or I don't know where to go. She picked a space and said, this is where I'm going to be to become an ally. Sarah, what are your words of wisdom, and how can people find you?
I'm easy to find. I'm at Happiness is Courage on all the platforms, happinessiscourage.com. There you can find copies of my books like Silver Threads, Living a Life of Gratitude. I think when I think about the individual contributor, an important thing to consider is you can start to find more happiness in the workplace or in your life by simply taking control of the things where that is possible. And the truth is, there are more spaces to do that than most of us realize. For example, an easy way to take control is to just simply choose to wear a silly pair of socks to work. It's little things like that that make a huge difference when practiced on a regular basis. So find your happiness by taking control where you can, and that will give you the boost to take on the hard challenges.
I love it. You brought up, oh my gosh, I could have about 37 conversations with the stuff you said today. Kirk, what's your final words of wisdom, and where can people find you?
My final word is that I help companies supercharge their bottom line through disability inclusion. And the fact of the matter is, employers are seeking talent. Only 35% of us with significant disabilities are working. And the lived experience of disability allows us to develop some unique strengths that are very valuable in the workplace, such as resilience and grit and creative problem solving and ability to work in a team and communication skills, ability to analyze and manage risk. So there's a lot of talented people with unique skills waiting for those opportunities that employers have. My consulting practice is called Innovative Impact LLC, and the best way to reach me is through LinkedIn. So Kirk Adams, PhD, Innovative Impact LLC via LinkedIn. And I will talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime about accelerating inclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace.
Love it. Thank you so much, Kirk. I mean, you guys have made so many great points today. Kiara?
Yes, I would say the two pieces to lead with is to speak up, speak truth, and be aware, and also to be civically engaged. You can follow me at Dr. Kai Ofwani on all social media platforms, and I also put my email and Calendly in the link below. I wrote a book called Health Reparations. And so as we look at the Tulsa massacre being dismissed, affirmative action being overturned, and things of that nature, you being civically engaged and aware is going to be very key to making sure that we don't regress from the progress that we have made. So check in and tap in with us, and we'll give you more information on how we can progress together.
Listen, there is a whole conversation that I feel like we just need to, we're going to talk tomorrow, because we need to do some talk about what is happening in Oklahoma, right? I just don't, this is the only place, from my understanding, the United States that has had bombs dropped on it. And then you have a judge to say, no, we can't repay you for the systematic damage that has been done generationally to your family. That's crazy. We're going to talk about that. Tim, let me get you a plug, and then I'm going to close this out.
Yes. You can find me at Dr. Tim Hill, drtimhill.com. My business is Inspire Education and Counseling. What we do is we bring culture and community to not only the school, but we also bring it to your life and your relationship. And I also want to plug the We're Doper Together hip hop relational R&B and hip hop tour coming to you soon. So the thing is honestly, we just want to make sure that your mental health is good, because if your mental health is good, it doesn't matter what is going on in the world, because yourself ain't right. So keep working on yourself, keep growing yourself, and we'll see you soon.
Man, I am so excited. I'm so thankful for each of you today. My name is Dr. Kristy Taylor, founder of WORxK Solutions, LLC. Today is the first of many conversations to come. I have an upcoming book, Introduction to the REBT framework, that introduces my framework that I use for coaching, as well as it is a system that can foster dynamic change within organizations. Our next event, we're going to be doing this on a monthly basis, is going to be on July 27th. It is Disability Pride Month, and we're going to do that at 10 o'clock a.m. on the 27th, so you'll see more information about that Thank you guys for tuning in today. This has been an awesome conversation, an awesome start. And you see that we're not going to just address the superficial things. We're going to address the deeply rooted issues. So this will be available for replay within the next few hours. So thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you. We're excited to have you and all our guests today. Have a great day.